Now to make this little piece, I've cut a 45 on this piece of molding. I'm going to mark its length in place instead of using a tape measure. Now, when I cut this square, the little piece will fit. I'm going to use yellow glue instead of construction adhesive on this little piece because I have a pretty nice fit. I'm going to use tape because a little finish nail might split this piece. There, we'll just leave that there until the glue dries. Working on the return nosing for the second tread. I'm doing this one a little differently, and I'll show you just a minute how I'm rounding over this edge instead of cutting that little piece. On the first half of the stairway, I use pretty traditional methods for stair building. On the second half, we'll simply be butting our treads and risers into the skirt board. I've added a third carriage for support since we won't be routing mortises. Also, in this method, you might use a thinner skirt board. I've also put a spacer in here to pull this carriage away from the skirt board. And I've screwed this carriage tightly to the skirt board so we won't have any cracks opening at our butt joint later on. Let me show you how we scribe these risers now. As you can see, we have a gap at the bottom, but we're tight at the top. I'm just going to take my pencil, holding it tight against the skirt board, draw a line from top to bottom. Now when I cut that line, we should have a good tight fit. First thing I'm going to do is check this line I've scribed for square, and it's not square. If it were, I could make this cut without any adjustments. Since it's not square, I'm going to have to tilt this board a little off of 90 degrees. Now when I run it through the saw, it should follow that line. Let's try its fit. Oh, that looks great. Now I can mark the length and cut this miter. Set this last nail here. It's a good idea to check every once in a while, make sure things are still on track. We still have our 10-inch run there, and there, and there. It's right on. Now you can remember I had a groove in this riser on the first 3 steps, and that fit with the tongue from the tread. On these stairs, or steps, we're just going to butt the tread into the riser and rely on the glue and screws from the back to keep this joint tight. First I'll cut my tread to length, then I'll plow my dado. These marks keep me from sawing too far. The riser fits into this dado. I'm going to mark in place where my dado has to stop. And I'm going to chisel out what I couldn't do on the table saw. Now I need to mark its length. Since we don't have any return nosing on this one, I'll mark flush with my finished skirt board and add the 1.1" for the nosing. Now I'll draw a line that's square. This is where I'll cut with my table saw. After it's cut, I need to route the end of the tread to the same profile that's on the front. To do this, I'm using a 1-inch diameter roundover bit. To make the rounded edge, I make a pass on both top and bottom. Now a belt sander will make short work out of any burn marks on end grain. And a few strokes with a sanding block will finish it off. Now even though there's no tongue and groove joint here, I still need to use glue. And of course I wipe it all over the place if I don't know what else to do with it. I slip the tread over the riser, and then I have to secure it in place. I use 2.5-inch sheetrock screws at both ends because I don't have a wedged mortise to hold it in place. Okay, it's a little crowded under here with all of us, but I'm going to try and show you where we put these glue blocks. These will keep the stairs from squeaking in time. Right at the corner of the riser and the tread, sink it in with a screw. One on the other side, too. Well, I finished that one, and a lot of people, including myself, prefer the simpler lines of this method. We have no return nosing here, as we did on this step. Sometimes this return nosing is necessary if we're going to house our balusters. Since I'll be using dowels in my balusters, it wasn't necessary. Well, I've installed all but the last tread and riser, and I need the landing newel in place before I can do those. I thought it might make more sense to come down and take a look at this newel first, though. As you can see, I've cut a notch in the bottom of this newel and also a notch in the corner of this tread. This way, the newel will fit over this corner and make for a really sturdy installation. Whenever possible, I like to let the newel through the subfloor down into the floor framing. This will help make an extra sturdy installation. Of course, the size of these notches will have to be made for your stairway, but just remember the center line of the balustrade must line up with the center line of the newel, and here that is centered over the skirt board. I've made this newel post by gluing two boards together. That should help keep it from twisting in the future. I've chamfered all the corners and also put a bevel up here at the top. That's good and snug. Now, I've made the counterbores straight so my plugs will still fit, but I'm putting the lag bolt in at an angle so I can catch some of the wood inside the carriage. That will give those threads something to bite into. There, that's tight. That's close enough, and side looks pretty good too. Solid. Well, I've beveled the top and chamfered the edges of this post, just like on the other one. I've also put a piece of sheetrock in place. Now these notches may look complicated, but I believe if you take it one notch at a time and do your layout in place, you won't have any problems. I'm going to slide this over into its final position. You can see the center line of our newel post has lined up with the center of our skirt board. The same is true on this side. Now, if I was putting this finished skirt board in, I'd also have to mortise a housing for it. I don't have to put my lags in from the front on this post. I've already drilled my holes. All I have to do is install them from the back, and then I can finish the tread and the riser. Well, that seats our last tread and riser. All that's left is this piece of transition tread. It's full thickness in the front, and I've cut it down to 3/4 of an inch in the back. I've put a groove in it to mate with the tongue from the flooring. It goes in place just like a regular tread. Now I'll just screw that down and it'll be finished. Well, we're done with the risers and treads. The newel posts are in place, and all we have to do is bridge the two. I've got a piece of hand railing here that we're going to use. I've cut a little profile of this hand railing where my fingers are going to slide. I've made those round grooves with this cove bit in my router table. I've also plowed a groove in the bottom of the handrail to accept the tops of the balusters. Now, using my miter box and my bevel gauge, I've already cut the bottom of this piece of railing at the right angle. I'm going to butt it into the post, and setting it on top of all these nosings, I'll mark its length in place.